The recruitment station on Kepler Station buzzed with activity as dozens of alien species lined up to join the Galactic defense. Corps, towering Thraxians with their forearms and chitinous armor dominated the crowd, their natural weapons gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Sleek Vortani slithered through the masses, their serpentine bodies coiled with deadly precision. The hulking Gorvak stomped around, each footstep shaking the metal floor, their thick hides scarred from countless battles. Then there was Marcus Chen, standing barely 6 feet tall among giants. The human looked almost comically out of place. His standard-issue military fatigue seemed pathetic compared to the natural armor and weapons surrounding him. The other recruits barely glanced at him, and when they did, it was with barely concealed amusement. Sergeant Vextar, a battle-scarred Thraxian with 3 cybernetic limbs, processed the applications with mechanical efficiency. When Marcus stepped forward, the sergeant's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. Species? Vextar asked, though the answer was obvious. Human, sir. Combat specialization? Sniper, sir. The clicking intensified and several nearby recruits turned to stare. A Vortani named Sistak uncoiled slightly, his forked tongue tasting the air with disdain. A sniper? How quaint. What's your effective range, little mammal? Marcus kept his expression neutral. 2,000 meters with standard equipment, sir. The laughter that erupted from the crowd was deafening. Even Sergeant Vexitar's professional demeanor cracked slightly. A massive Gorvak named Krug slammed one of his tree trunk arms on the nearby wall, causing the entire section to vibrate. 2,000 meters? Krug bellowed. My throwing spears have better range than that. And they explode. Sitak's eyes glittered with malicious humor. Perhaps the human should consider a career in food service instead. I hear your species makes excellent cooks. More laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus had heard it all before during his journey to the station. Humans were the newest species to join the galactic community, and their reputation preceded them, unfortunately not in a good way. Most aliens saw them as weak, soft, and tragically limited by their biology. The Thraxians could see in multiple spectrums simultaneously and had reflexes 3 times faster than humans. The Vortani possessed natural camouflage that made them nearly invisible and could strike with lightning speed. The Gorvak were living tanks with hide thick enough to deflect most energy weapons. Each species had evolved natural advantages that made them formidable warriors. Humans, by comparison, seemed to have drawn the short stick in the evolutionary lottery. Average strength, average speed, average durability. No natural weapons, no built-in armor, no special abilities that couldn't be replicated better by technology. Sergeant Vexitar stamped Marcus's application with more force than necessary. You'll be assigned to the 47th Mixed Infantry Battalion under Captain Zorthak. Try not to get yourself killed on the first day, human. As Marcus moved toward the transport bay, the jokes continued behind him. I give him a week before he requests transfer to logistics. A week? You're generous. I say 3 days. 20 credits says he doesn't even make it through basic combat scenarios. Marcus found his assigned quarters in the cramped transport ship that would take them to the frontier world of Nexus Prime. The room was designed for Thraxian physiology, leaving him with more space than he needed but furniture that didn't quite fit his body type. As he unpacked his gear, his roommate arrived. The creature that entered was unlike anything Marcus had encountered before. Tall and gangly with 6 limbs, crystalline skin that seemed to shift colors, and multiple eyes arranged in a geometric pattern around its head. It moved with an otherworldly grace that made Marcus slightly dizzy to watch. I am Zephyr 9 Alpha, the being announced in a voice like wind chimes. I am what your species would classify as a scout specialist. I assume you are the human sniper that has caused such amusement among the troops? Marcus extended his hand in greeting. Marcus Chen. And yes, I seem to be today's entertainment. Zephyr 9 Alpha regarded the offered hand with several of its eyes before gently touching it with one of its upper appendages. Your species has an interesting custom of physical contact for greetings. Among my people, such contact would be considered quite intimate. Sorry, I didn't know. No offense taken. I am curious about your confidence despite the obvious skepticism of your peers. Your effective range is significantly shorter than most galactic standard weapons, and your physical capabilities appear unremarkable. Yet you seem unperturbed by their mockery. Marcus smiled as he continued unpacking. Inside his weapon case lay his pride and joy. a heavily modified sniper rifle that had been his companion through 3 tours of duty in the Terran conflicts. The rifle itself looked primitive compared to the sleek energy weapons favored by most galactic forces. But Marcus knew better than most that appearances could be deceiving. In my experience, Marcus said, checking the rifle's scope calibration, the best weapon isn't always the one with the biggest numbers on paper. Sometimes it's about knowing how to use what you have. Zephyr 9 Alpha's eyes shifted to focus on the weapon. A projectile-based system. How remarkably archaic. Most species abandoned such crude technology millennia ago. Maybe that's their mistake. The transport ship lurched as it dropped out of hyperspace, and the intercom crackled to life. Captain Zorthak's voice, distorted by the translation matrix, announced their arrival at Nexus Prime. Through the porthole, Marcus could see the frontier world, spinning slowly below them. The planet's surface was a patchwork of green continents and blue oceans, but the scars of war were visible even from orbit. Blackened craters marked former cities, and the twisted remains of orbital platforms drifted like metal grave markers in the planet's gravitational field. Beautiful, Zephyr 9 Alpha observed, its voice carrying notes of sadness. Before the Void Syndicate arrived, Nexus Prime was considered one of the crown jewels of the Outer Rim. Now it serves as a grim reminder of what we fight to protect. As their shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Marcus watched the landscape transform from orbital overview to ground-level reality. The forward operating base sprawled across what had once been a major city, its defensive walls built from the rubble of destroyed buildings. Guard towers stretched toward the sky like metal fingers, bristling with weapons and sensors. The moment they landed, the reality of their situation became clear. This wasn't a training exercise or a peaceful deployment. The distant sound of artillery echoed across the base, and the smell of smoke hung heavy in the recycled air. Medical transports rushed past their landing platform, carrying wounded soldiers whose species Marcus couldn't immediately identify. As they disembarked, Marcus caught fragments of conversation from the medical staff and nearby soldiers. The news wasn't good. The Void Syndicate had been pushing hard against the outer perimeter for weeks, using tactics that seemed to anticipate every move the defenders made. Morale was low, casualties were mounting, and rumor had it that High Command was considering a strategic withdrawal. Marcus shouldered his gear and followed the stream of new arrivals toward the processing center. Around him, his fellow recruits maintained their earlier confidence, but he could see the subtle signs of nervousness beginning to show. Even the mighty Gorvak seemed to walk a little more carefully, and the Vortani's usual predatory grace had taken on a more cautious quality. Tomorrow, they would receive their first combat assignments. Tomorrow, Marcus would get his chance to prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy wasn't the biggest, fastest, or most advanced. Sometimes it was simply the most precisely aimed. The briefing room fell silent as Captain Zorthak, a seasoned Thraxian with battle scars covering half his carapace, activated the holographic display. The 3-dimensional map of the surrounding terrain materialized in the center of the room, showing enemy positions marked in ominous red. Clusters. Intelligence. Reports indicate that Void Syndicate forces have established a forward observation post here. The captain's mandibles clicked as he indicated an elevated position, approximately 3 kilometers from their base. This position gives them clear sight, lines to our main supply routes, and has been directing artillery strikes against our convoys for the past 2 weeks. Marcus studied the terrain carefully while his fellow soldiers whispered among themselves. The observation post sat atop a rocky outcropping surrounded by dense vegetation, with clear fields of fire in multiple directions. It was a textbook defensive position that would be costly to assault directly. Krug raised one massive arm. Sir, my squad can punch through their defenses within the hour. Gorvak infantry doesn't retreat from such minor obstacles. Several other soldiers voiced their agreement. The Vortani contingent suggested using their natural camouflage to infiltrate the position under cover of darkness. A group of Thraxian rapid assault specialists proposed a coordinated strike using their superior speed and reflexes. Captain Zorthak listened to each proposal before shaking his head. Intelligence estimates 30 to 40 enemy combatants in fortified positions. Direct assault would likely succeed, but casualties would be significant. We cannot afford to lose experienced soldiers on what amounts to a reconnaissance mission. Sistak uncoiled slightly from his position near the back of the room. Perhaps we should simply call in orbital bombardment. Reduce the entire position to atoms and be done with it. Negative. The Void Syndicate has anti-orbital defenses in the area. Any ship that gets close enough for effective bombardment would be destroyed. We need a surgical solution, not a sledgehammer. The room fell into contemplative silence as each species considered their options. Marcus had remained quiet throughout the discussion, but now he cleared his throat softly. "Sir, request permission to speak." Every head in the room turned toward him. Captain Zorthak's compound eyes focused on the human, with what might have been surprise. "You have a suggestion, Private Chen?" Marcus stood and approached the holographic display. With practiced efficiency, he began pointing out details that the others had overlooked. The observation post has excellent sightlines for artillery spotting, but that also means they need to maintain visual contact with their targets. Look at the positioning of their defensive emplacements. He gestured to the red markers indicating enemy positions. They're oriented outward to repel direct assault, which means limited coverage of approaches from specific angles. There's a natural depression here, approximately 2,000 meters from their position, that would provide concealment for a single operator. Krug snorted derisively. 2,000 meters? Even our standard pulse rifles are ineffective at that range. You would need a heavy weapons team to engage from such a distance. Marcus smiled slightly. "Sir, request permission to eliminate the observation post using precision fire from concealed position." The silence that followed was profound. Then the laughter began, starting as quiet chuckles and building to outright guffaws. Even Captain Zorthak's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Private," the captain said once the noise subsided, "your enthusiasm is commendable, but your species' weapons technology is simply inadequate for such a mission. The effective range of human small arms is well documented. With respect, sir, those documents might not tell the whole story." Sistak's eyes glittered with malicious humor. "Are you suggesting that military intelligence is incorrect about your species' capabilities? How remarkably arrogant for such a primitive creature." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I'm suggesting that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the most advanced one. Request permission to attempt the mission, sir." Captain Zorthak studied the human for a long moment. The room remained silent except for the distant sound of artillery fire and the hum of life support systems. Finally, the captain's mandibles clicked in what might have been resignation. "Very well, Private Chen. You have 12 hours to eliminate the observation post. If you fail, we will proceed with conventional assault tactics. Dismissed." As the other soldiers filed out of the briefing room, Marcus could hear their conversations. 12 hours? The human won't last 12 minutes once he's spotted. This should be entertaining. I wonder if we'll even hear the shot that kills him. 20 credits says he never even attempts to get within firing range. Zephyr 9 Alpha approached Marcus as he studied the tactical display more closely. "Are you certain about this course of action? The margin for error appears vanishingly small." Marcus nodded, his attention focused on memorizing every detail of the terrain. "In my line of work, the margin for error is always small. The difference between success and failure is usually measured in millimeters and milliseconds. Your confidence is either admirable or suicidal. I have not yet determined which. Probably both." That evening, Marcus spent several hours in the weapons maintenance bay, carefully cleaning and calibrating his rifle. The weapon had served him well through numerous campaigns, and he knew its capabilities better than he knew his own heartbeat. Every component had been personally selected and modified to meet his exact specifications. Word of his mission had spread throughout the base, and Marcus found himself the center of attention wherever he went. Most of the attention was mocking, but he noticed a few soldiers watching him with something approaching curiosity. Perhaps they were beginning to wonder if there might be more to the quiet human than met the eye. As night fell over Nexus Prime, Marcus made his final preparations. He blackened his face and hands with camouflage paint, checked his equipment one last time, and loaded his rifle with specially selected ammunition. Each round had been hand-loaded to precise specifications, designed for maximum accuracy at extreme range. The journey to his chosen position took 3 hours of careful movement through terrain that would have challenged even the Vortani's stealth capabilities. Marcus moved like a ghost through the darkness, using every shadow and depression to mask his approach. His years of experience had taught him that patience and preparation were more valuable than any natural advantage. When he finally reached the depression he had identified during the briefing, Marcus spent another hour setting up his shooting position. He carefully arranged his equipment, calculated wind speed and direction, and adjusted his scope to compensate for the atmospheric conditions on Nexus Prime. The enemy observation post was exactly where intelligence had indicated. Its lights visible against the dark sky like a small constellation, Marcus could see figures moving around the defensive positions, their alien forms silhouetted against the illuminated command bunker. Through his scope, he began identifying targets. The Void Syndicate employed multiple species, but Marcus could distinguish the command personnel from regular soldiers by their behavior and positioning. Years of experience had taught him to read the subtle signs that indicated who was making the important decisions. He settled into his shooting position and began to wait. In his experience, the best snipers weren't necessarily the best shots. They were the ones with the patience to wait for the perfect moment, the discipline to take only the shots that mattered, and the wisdom to know when not to shoot at all. Dawn was still several hours away, but Marcus was content to wait. He had learned long ago that time was just another tool in a sniper's arsenal, and like all tools, it was most effective when used with precision and purpose. In the distance, the enemy observation post continued its deadly work, unaware that death was watching them through a scope, calculating distance and windage, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The hunt had begun. The first gray light of dawn crept across the landscape as Marcus maintained his vigil. Through his scope, the enemy observation post had transformed from a collection of lights in the darkness to a clearly defined military installation. He counted 43 enemy combatants representing at least 4 different species, all working with the coordinated efficiency of a veteran unit. Marcus had spent the pre-dawn hours studying their routine. Like all military units, they followed patterns. Guard changes occurred every 2 hours. The command staff emerged from their bunker at regular intervals to survey the surrounding area. Supply runs followed predictable schedules. More importantly, he had identified the key personnel. The observation post was commanded by what appeared to be a Kethmoran, a species known for their strategic brilliance and natural tactical abilities. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and a head that rotated nearly 300 degrees, making it an ideal spotter for artillery strikes. 2 subordinate commanders had also emerged during the night. A heavily armored Brutak, who seemed to be in charge of the defensive positions, and a smaller, quicker species that Marcus didn't recognize but who appeared to coordinate communications with other Void Syndicate units. Back at the base, the morning briefing was proceeding without him. Captain Zorthak had checked the mission status twice, both times shaking his head at the lack of communication from their human volunteer. "No contact for 6 hours, reported Lieutenant Vextos, the communications officer. Either Private Chen has been captured or eliminated, or he has abandoned the mission." Krug slammed one massive fist against the planning table. "I told you the human was inadequate for this task. We should have sent a proper assault force from the beginning. The human's weapon can't even reach the target from a safe distance," added Sistak, his forked tongue tasting the air with satisfaction. "This entire exercise has been a waste of valuable time." Captain Zorthak studied the tactical display with growing frustration. Intelligence reports indicated that 3 more supply convoys had been destroyed during the night, guided by artillery strikes directed from the observation post. Each loss brought them closer to a critical shortage of ammunition and medical supplies. "Prepare assault teams for immediate deployment," the captain ordered. "We cannot afford to wait any longer." At that moment, Marcus was making his final calculations. Wind speed had decreased slightly as the morning air settled, requiring a minor adjustment to his scope. The range was exactly 2,247 meters according to his laser rangefinder, well within his effective engagement distance but challenging enough to require absolute precision. The Kethmoran commander had emerged from the bunker again, following the same routine Marcus had observed throughout the night. The creature would spend approximately 90 seconds surveying the surrounding terrain, before returning to coordinate the next artillery strike. Marcus controlled his breathing, settling into the familiar rhythm that had served him through dozens of similar situations. His finger found the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack without firing. Through his scope, the crosshairs settled on the center of the target's torso. The rifle's report echoed across the landscape like thunder. 2 kilometers away. The Catamaran commander's head exploded in a shower of alien blood and brain matter. The creature's body stood upright for almost 3 seconds before toppling backward, its forearms twitching spasmodically. The reaction at the observation post was immediate and chaotic. Soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting orders in multiple alien languages while scanning the horizon for threats. Several opened fire with their energy weapons, but their shots fell harmlessly short, striking the ground hundreds of meters from Marcus's position. Marcus had already chambered another round and was tracking his second target. The Brutak defensive commander had emerged from cover, bellowing orders while trying to organize a response to the unexpected attack. The creature's heavy armor would normally protect against most small arms fire, but Marcus had come prepared for such contingencies. His second shot took the Brutak high in the chest, punching through its armor plating with the devastating power of a high-velocity tungsten core round. The creature spun completely around before crashing into a defensive barrier, its armored bulk crushing several smaller soldiers who had been seeking cover nearby. Panic was spreading through the observation post like wildfire. These soldiers were veterans of numerous campaigns, but they had never faced an enemy who could strike with lethal precision from beyond the range of their own weapons. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical casualties. Marcus's third target was the communications coordinator. This shot was more challenging because the creature was smaller and moving erratically, but Marcus had faced similar challenges before. He led the target slightly, compensating for its movement pattern, and squeezed the trigger. The round caught the communications officer in the center of mass, lifting it completely off its feet and sending it crashing through the wall of a prefabricated shelter. The impact destroyed several pieces of critical communications equipment, effectively cutting the observation post off from the rest of the Void Syndicate forces. Back at the base, Lieutenant Vexta suddenly straightened at his communications console. "Sir, we're receiving reports of explosions and weapons fire from the enemy observation post." Captain Zorthak's mandibles clicked with surprise. "Artillery barrage? I gave no such orders." "Negative, sir. The reports describe small arms fire of unknown origin. Enemy communications have gone silent." Krug snorted dismissively, probably fighting among themselves. The Void Syndicate species are notorious for their lack of discipline, but Zephyr 9 Alpha, who had been monitoring the tactical display with several of its crystalline eyes, noticed something that the others had missed. "Captain, observe the timing of the communications blackout. It corresponds exactly with Private Chen's estimated arrival at his intended position." The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. Zorthak's eyes narrowed to suspicious slits. "You're suggesting that a single human with a primitive projectile weapon is responsible for disrupting an entire enemy installation?" "I am suggesting that we may have underestimated our human colleague." At the observation post, the surviving enemy soldiers had finally begun to organize an effective response. Squad leaders were shouting orders, trying to establish fields of fire toward Marcus's general direction, while maintaining cover from his devastating accuracy. Marcus had anticipated this reaction. His next 3 shots came in rapid succession, each one carefully planned to maximize psychological impact. A squad leader attempting to coordinate the defense, a heavy weapons specialist trying to set up a long-range energy cannon, a medic working to save one of the wounded commanders. Each shot was a reminder that nowhere in the observation post was safe from his reach. The enemy soldiers began to understand that they were dealing with something beyond their experience, a form of warfare that rendered their technological advantages meaningless. By mid-morning, the observation post had effectively ceased to function as a military installation. Of the original 43 defenders, Marcus had eliminated 12 key personnel with surgical precision. The survivors had abandoned their positions and were retreating toward secondary defensive lines, carrying their wounded and leaving behind millions of credits worth of equipment. Marcus waited another hour to ensure that the retreat was genuine before beginning his own withdrawal. He carefully policed his brass, collected his equipment, and began the long journey back to base. The mission had been a complete success, but he knew that the real test would come when he had to face his skeptical colleagues. As he moved through the same terrain he had crossed in darkness, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the old ways were still the best ways, and sometimes the most primitive weapon was also the most effective. The laughter would stop now, The atmosphere in the command center was electric with disbelief as reports continued to stream in from reconnaissance drones surveying the former observation post. Captain Zorthak stood before the main display, his compound eyes processing multiple data streams simultaneously, while his mandibles clicked in a rhythm that indicated deep concentration. Confirmed casualties. 12 enemy combatants eliminated, including all command staff, reported Lieutenant Vextos, his voice carrying a note of amazement. Complete abandonment of the position with significant equipment left behind. No friendly casualties reported. The assembled officers maintained stunned silence. Krug was the first to speak, his massive frame seeming somehow diminished. 12 targets eliminated? From 2 kilometers distance? With a projectile weapon? The ballistics are consistent with small-caliber kinetic rounds, added the Thraxian intelligence officer. Trajectory analysis indicates a single firing position, exactly where Private Chen indicated he would establish overwatch. Sistak coiled and uncoiled nervously, his serpentine body betraying his agitation. There must be some mistake. Perhaps the human called in orbital support or used hidden explosive devices. Negative, Captain Zorthak replied, studying the detailed reconnaissance images. Blast patterns and wound analysis confirm precision rifle fire. Each shot was placed with surgical accuracy to eliminate specific high-value targets. The implications were staggering. A single human soldier, using what the Galactic military establishment considered obsolete technology, had accomplished what would normally require a full assault battalion with significant casualties. Zephyr 9 Alpha spoke with its characteristic chiming voice. I believe we owe Private Chen a formal apology, and perhaps a substantial revision of our assumptions about human military capabilities. Marcus arrived at the base perimeter 3 hours later, moving with the same deliberate caution he had maintained throughout the mission. The guard towers had been alerted to expect his return, but the Vortani sentries still did double-takes when they spotted his approach. Word of his success had spread throughout the base like wildfire. As Marcus made his way toward the command center to deliver his mission report, he found himself the center of attention from species that had barely acknowledged his existence 24 hours earlier. A group of Thraxian rapid assault specialists stopped their training exercise to watch him pass. Their superior reflexes and enhanced vision, which had seemed so impressive during recruitment, suddenly felt less significant when compared to the devastating precision he had demonstrated. The Gorvak Heavy infantry squad that had mocked his physical limitations now regarded him with something approaching reverence. Krug himself stepped forward as Marcus approached the command center, his massive head bowed in what Marcus recognized as a gesture of respect. Human, Krug rumbled, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. I owe you apology. Your methods may be different from ours, but your effectiveness cannot be questioned. Marcus nodded politely. No apology necessary. We all serve the same cause. The command center doors slid open to reveal Captain Zorthak waiting with his entire staff. The formal debriefing that followed was unlike anything Marcus had experienced in his military career. Every detail of his mission was analyzed and recorded, from his approach route to his target selection criteria. Explain to me, the captain requested, how you achieved such precision at extreme range with primitive kinetic weapons. Marcus considered his answer carefully. The truth was that human marksmanship relied on factors that most alien species didn't fully understand or appreciate. Where other species depended on technological enhancement or natural abilities, humans had developed an almost mystical relationship with their weapons. It's not just about the technology, sir. It's about understanding the environment, reading the target, and having the patience to wait for the perfect moment. A rifle is just a tool. The real weapon is the mind behind it. The Thraxian intelligence officer leaned forward with obvious interest. Our analysis indicates that several of your shots required compensation for factors that shouldn't be detectable by standard human senses. Wind variance, atmospheric pressure, even planetary rotation. How did you account for these variables? Experience, sir. You learn to feel things that instruments can't measure. Every planet has its own personality, its own rhythm. Once you understand that rhythm, you can work with it instead of against it. Lieutenant Vextos consulted his datapad. Private Chen, your weapon appears to be significantly modified from standard human military specifications. Can you elaborate on these modifications? For the next hour, Marcus explained the intricacies of his rifle system. the hand-loaded ammunition designed for specific environmental conditions, the custom barrel that had been crafted by a master gunsmith on Earth, the scope that had been personally calibrated to his shooting style and preferences. What emerged from the debriefing was a revelation about human military doctrine that shocked the assembled officers. Where most species relied on standardized equipment and tactics, humans emphasized individual adaptation and personalization. Every human sniper was, in effect, a unique weapon system optimized for specific conditions and targets. This explains much about your species' reputation for unpredictability, observed Zephyr 9 Alpha. Where we seek consistency and standardization, you embrace variation and adaptation. Different approaches for different problems, Marcus agreed. Sometimes the unexpected solution is the most effective one. As the formal debriefing concluded, Captain Zorthak made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the room. Private Chen, effective immediately, you are promoted to corporal and assigned as primary reconnaissance specialist for this sector. Additionally, I'm requesting that Galactic Command establish a human marksmanship training program for interested personnel. The promotion was unprecedented. No human had ever been elevated to specialist status so quickly, and the prospect of aliens learning human shooting techniques was revolutionary. But the real test of Marcus's newfound reputation came later that evening in the base's recreational facility. The massive common area buzzed with conversation as soldiers from dozens of species shared meals and compared stories from their various homeworlds. Marcus entered to find the usual evening crowds, but something was different. Conversations quieted as he passed, and soldiers who had previously ignored him now nodded respectfully. A table of Thraxian assault specialists actually invited him to join them, an honor that would have been unthinkable the day before. Isthak approached his table during the meal, moving with the fluid grace of his species but carrying himself with obvious deference. Corporal Chen, I owe you an apology for my previous comments. Your demonstration today has opened my eyes to possibilities I had not considered. No harm done, Marcus replied, gesturing for the Vortani to join him. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. The key is learning to work together. What followed was one of the most unusual conversations of Marcus's military career. Isthak, it turned out, was genuinely curious about human tactical doctrine and wanted to understand how Marcus had achieved such devastating effectiveness. With seemingly primitive equipment, your species appears to have developed warfare into an art form, the Vortani observed. While we focus on enhancing our natural abilities, you have learned to transcend your biological limitations through skill and creativity. Maybe that's our advantage, Marcus mused. We can't rely on natural weapons or armor, so we have to think differently. We have to be smarter, more patient, more precise. By the end of the evening, Marcus found himself surrounded by alien soldiers eager to learn about human marksmanship techniques. The mockery and dismissal of the previous day had been replaced by genuine respect and curiosity. As he returned to his quarters, Marcus reflected on the dramatic change in his circumstances. 24 hours ago, he had been a joke, a primitive creature with obsolete weapons playing soldier among his genetic superiors. Now he was a specialist, a teacher, and a respected member of the galactic military community. The laughter had indeed stopped, replaced by something far more valuable. Recognition that effectiveness came in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon was the one nobody saw coming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove that humanity's approach to warfare was not just viable, but perhaps uniquely suited to the complex realities of galactic conflict. 3 weeks after the observation post incident, Nexus Prime had become a very different battlefield. Word of Corporal Chen's success had spread throughout the Galactic Defense Corps, and requests for human snipers had begun pouring in from combat zones across the galaxy. But more immediately, the Void Syndicate had dramatically altered their tactics in response to this new threat. Marcus stood in the briefing room studying reconnaissance images that showed the enemy's adaptation. Gone were the exposed observation posts and predictable patrol patterns. The Void Syndicate forces had gone underground, literally, establishing a network of tunnels and bunkers that minimize their exposure to long-range fire. They're learning, Captain Zorthak observed, his mandibles clicking with grudging admiration. Intelligence reports indicate that Void Syndicate Command has issued specific warnings. About human snipers to all their units, Lieutenant. Vextos activated the holographic display, showing the enemy's new defensive positions. They've established a series of hardened bunkers connected by underground passages. Surface exposure is limited to armored vehicles and heavily shielded weapon emplacements. Krug rumbled his disapproval. Cowards. They fear to face us in honest combat. It's smart tactics, Marcus corrected, studying the display carefully. They've identified a threat and adapted their strategy to neutralize it. That's what good soldiers do. Sesethak, who had become one of Marcus's most enthusiastic students, uncoiled slightly. But surely this limits your effectiveness, Corporal. If they remain underground, they present no targets for precision fire. Marcus smiled enigmatically. That depends on your definition of targets. The human had spent the past 3 weeks not just on missions, but teaching interested aliens the fundamentals of human marksmanship. The results had been fascinating and sometimes comical. Thraxians with their superior reflexes could track moving targets with incredible speed, but their multi-spectrum vision actually hindered them when it came to the precise calculations required for extreme range shooting. Vortani had excellent natural camouflage but struggled with the patience required for proper stalking. The most successful students had been the Zephyrian scouts like Zephyr 9 Alpha, whose crystalline physiology allowed them to remain motionless for hours and whose geometric eye arrangement provided unique advantages for range estimation. But the real breakthrough had come when Marcus began teaching combined arms tactics that integrated human precision fire with alien natural abilities. Vortani scouts could identify targets that human eyes might miss, while Thraxian rapid response teams could exploit the chaos created by well-placed sniper fire. Sir, Marcus said, turning to Captain Zorthak, request permission to demonstrate advanced human tactical doctrine. The captain's compound eyes focused on him with interest. Explain. The enemy thinks that going underground protects them from precision fire. They're wrong. They've actually made themselves more vulnerable by limiting their mobility and concentrating their forces. Marcus moved to the holographic display and began highlighting specific features of the enemy positions. Look at their ventilation systems. Underground installations require air circulation, which means exhaust ports and intake vents. These systems are vulnerable to what we call kinetic disruption. You mean to collapse their tunnels? Asked the Thraxian intelligence officer. Not exactly. Watch. Marcus manipulated the display to show a cross-section of a typical bunker system. A precision shot into a ventilation intake loaded with a specialized payload can introduce chemical agents into their entire air supply. Non-lethal but highly effective. Zephyr 9 Alpha's multiple eyes focused on the display with interest. You speak of chemical warfare. Most galactic conventions prohibit such tactics. Not chemical weapons, Marcus clarified. Crowd control agents. Tear gas, smoke, disorienting compounds. All perfectly legal under galactic rules of engagement and highly effective for forcing enemies out of fortified positions. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Captain Zorthak's mandibles clicked rapidly. You're suggesting we can force them to abandon their defensive advantages and engage on our terms. Exactly. They think they're safe underground. We show them that nowhere is safe from precision fire when properly applied. What followed was one of the most complex joint operations ever attempted on Nexus Prime. Marcus worked with alien specialists to develop specialized ammunition loads designed for specific tactical effects. Thraxian chemists created non-lethal compounds that would incapacitate without permanent harm. Vortani infiltration specialists identified optimal firing positions that provided access to enemy ventilation systems. The operation launched at dawn, with Marcus positioned on a ridgeline 3 kilometers from the primary enemy bunker complex. His rifle had been loaded with custom rounds containing a payload of concentrated tear gas, designed to disperse through ventilation systems. His first shot struck the primary air intake with surgical precision. The specialized round punctured the intake grating and released its payload directly into the airflow. Within minutes, the effects became apparent as enemy soldiers began emerging from hidden entrances, coughing and disoriented. This was the signal for Phase 2. Thraxian rapid assault teams, positioned at predetermined locations, engaged the disoriented enemies with non-lethal suppression fire, while Vortani teams used their natural camouflage to capture key personnel. Marcus continued his precise fire, targeting secondary air intakes and forcing the underground garrison to evacuate completely. Each shot was calculated not just for accuracy but for maximum tactical effect, creating chaos and confusion that allowed the ground teams to overwhelm organized resistance. The entire operation lasted less than 2 hours and resulted in the capture of 47 enemy combatants, including several high-ranking officers with 0 friendly casualties. More importantly, the captured intelligence revealed the locations of 6 additional bunker complexes and provided crucial insights into Void Syndicate strategic planning. The debriefing that followed attracted attention from the highest levels of Galactic Command. General Thexvar, the sector commander, participated via holographic link from the command ship, his ancient Thraxian features expressing what Marcus had learned to recognize as profound astonishment. Corporal Chen, the general said, "Your tactical innovations represent a paradigm shift in our approach to siege warfare. I am authorizing the immediate implementation of these techniques across all combat theaters." But the most significant moment came when the general made an unprecedented announcement. "Effective immediately, I am establishing the Human Integration Protocol. All major military operations will include human tactical advisors, and we are requesting additional human military personnel to serve as instructors for our forces." The transformation was remarkable. In less than a month, Marcus had gone from being a joke to being the template for a new form of galactic warfare. But perhaps more importantly, he had proven that diversity of thought and approach was not a weakness in military forces, but a crucial strength. That evening, as Marcus cleaned his rifle in the armory, he was joined by an unexpected visitor. Captain Zorthak entered, moving with the deliberate gait that indicated a formal occasion. "Corporal," the captain said, "I wanted to personally thank you for what you've accomplished here. You've not just served with distinction, you've changed how we think about warfare itself." Marcus looked up from his weapon maintenance. "I just did my job, sir. Humans have always been good at adapting to new situations. Perhaps that is precisely what we needed. Fresh perspectives on old problems." The captain paused, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "I have received word that you're being considered for promotion to sergeant and assignment to the Galactic War College as an instructor. Your thoughts on this development?" Marcus smiled as he reassembled his rifle. "I think there are a lot of alien soldiers who could benefit from learning that the most advanced weapon isn't always the most effective one. Sometimes the best tool is the one that makes you think differently about the problem." As Captain Zorthak left the armory, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had come to Nexus Prime as the target of mockery and derision, armed with what others considered primitive technology and obsolete tactics. Now he was pioneering new forms of warfare that would influence military doctrine across the galaxy. The laughter had not just stopped. It had been replaced by eager attention and genuine respect. But more than personal vindication, Marcus had helped prove a fundamental truth about military effectiveness: that innovation often came not from having the best equipment, but from finding new ways to use what you had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to demonstrate human tactical creativity. The galaxy was a big place, and there were many more lessons to teach. 6 months later, the Galactic War College on Kepler Station had become the most sought-after assignment in the Defense Corps. Students from across the galaxy competed for slots in the new Human Tactical Integration Program, where former Corporal Marcus Chen, now Sergeant Instructor, taught the art of what had become known as precision warfare. The classroom was a marvel of diversity. Towering Gorvak sat beside diminutive Pixar scouts, while Thraxian officers shared notes with serpentine Vortani strategists. At the front of the room, Marcus stood before a holographic display showing a complex battlefield scenario. "Today we're going to discuss target prioritization in asymmetric warfare," Marcus announced, manipulating the display to show multiple enemy positions. "Who can tell me what makes a target valuable?" A young Thraxian officer raised one of her forearms. "High-value personnel, sir. Command staff and specialists." "Good start, but incomplete," Marcus replied. "Anyone else?" Zephyr 9 Alpha, who had requested transfer to the War College specifically to study under Marcus, chimed with its crystalline voice. "Strategic assets that enable enemy operations. Communications, logistics, command and control." Better, but still thinking conventionally. Corporal Vashiti, the Vortani scout uncoiled slightly before responding. "Psychological targets, sir. eliminating specific individuals or destroying particular assets to create fear and uncertainty among enemy forces. Marcus smiled. Excellent. Now you're thinking like humans. The lesson that followed challenged everything the students thought they knew about military targeting. Where conventional galactic doctrine focused on numerical superiority and technological advantage, human tactical theory emphasized disruption, demoralization, and psychological warfare. A single well-placed shot can be worth more than an entire artillery barrage, Marcus explained, showing footage from his original mission on Nexus Prime. Not because of the physical damage, but because of what it represents. When an enemy realizes that their command staff can be eliminated at any time from any distance, they begin to doubt their own security. The footage showed the chaos that had erupted at the observation post after Marcus's first kill. Enemy soldiers abandoning positions, communications breaking down, unit cohesion collapsing. One death had created a cascade of fear that paralyzed an entire installation. This is why human snipers focus on precision, rather than firepower, Marcus continued. We don't need to kill everyone. We just need to kill the right ones. After the formal lesson, Marcus met with his advanced students for practical exercises. The War College had constructed elaborate training scenarios that simulated real combat conditions, allowing students to practice human tactical concepts in controlled environments. Today's exercise involved a hostage rescue scenario that would have been considered impossible under conventional doctrine. A heavily fortified compound held high-value prisoners in underground facilities, with multiple layers of security and overlapping fields of fire. Standard assault tactics would require significant forces and accept heavy casualties, explained Captain Mortex, the Gorvac observer assigned to evaluate the exercise. How does human doctrine approach this scenario? Marcus had divided his students into mixed species teams, each combining human tactical thinking with alien natural abilities. The first team consisted of Thraxian rapid assault specialists guided by human precision fire doctrine. The second team paired Vortani infiltration experts with human psychological warfare techniques. The key is identifying the enemy's assumptions and exploiting them, Marcus explained as the teams took their positions. They expect direct assault, so we give them misdirection. They prepare for overwhelming force, so we use surgical strikes. The exercise began with what appeared to be a conventional probe of the compound's defenses. The Thraxian team conducted high-speed reconnaissance that drew defensive fire and revealed enemy positions. But this was merely the setup for the real assault. While enemy attention focused on the obvious threat, Vortani infiltrators used their natural camouflage to penetrate the compound's perimeter. But instead of proceeding directly to the hostage location, they followed human doctrine by targeting the enemy's command and control infrastructure. Precision shots from concealed positions eliminated key sentries and communications personnel. Each kill was carefully planned to create maximum confusion with minimum exposure. Guard rotations were disrupted, communication channels were severed, and the compound's defensive coordination began to collapse. The breakthrough came when the infiltration team reached the compound's main power distribution center. Instead of destroying it, they followed human doctrine by gaining control of it. Lights flickered throughout the facility in pre-planned patterns that simulated artillery strikes, creating panic among defenders who believed they were under massive bombardment. In the confusion, the actual rescue proceeded with minimal resistance. Disoriented guards were easily overwhelmed, and the hostages were extracted through routes that the enemy had never considered. Vulnerable, the entire operation lasted 37 minutes and achieved complete success with 0 simulated casualties. Among the rescue teams, Captain Mortex reviewed the exercise results with obvious amazement. This is unlike any tactical doctrine in our databases. You achieved in minutes what conventional assault would have required hours and significant losses. That's the point, Marcus replied. Human warfare isn't about brute force. It's about making the enemy defeat themselves through fear, confusion, and miscalculation. The success of the Human Tactical Integration Program had far-reaching effects throughout the galaxy. Military academies on dozens of worlds began incorporating human doctrine into their curricula. The phrase "thinking like a human" became synonymous with innovative problem-solving in military circles. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The same alien species that had once mocked human limitations began to see those limitations as advantages. Where they had seen weakness, they now recognized adaptability. Where they had seen primitive technology, they now understood precision and efficiency. Marcus received regular updates from combat zones across the galaxy, where human-trained units were achieving remarkable success. The psychological impact of precision fire had proven effective against every known species. Even the most technologically advanced enemies found themselves vulnerable to tactics that emphasized intelligence over firepower. The transformation was perhaps best illustrated by an incident that occurred during Marcus's 6th month at the War College. A new group of Thraxian recruits arrived for training, their attitude displaying the same arrogance and dismissiveness that had characterized Marcus's early reception. One of the recruits, a young officer named HFY, openly questioned the value of learning from primitive humans and their obsolete weapons. The other students, veterans of the program, fell silent as they waited to see how Marcus would respond. Instead of anger or defensiveness, Marcus simply smiled and invited HFY to participate in a demonstration. A training target was placed at maximum range for Thraxian energy weapons, approximately 800 meters distant. "Show me how your superior technology handles this target," Marcus said calmly. HFY accepted the challenge eagerly, using his enhanced reflexes and multi-spectrum vision to acquire the target quickly. His energy weapon discharged with characteristic Thraxian precision, striking the target dead center. "Impressive," Marcus acknowledged. "Now observe." Marcus took position with his rifle, the same weapon that had eliminated 12 enemies from impossible range on Nexus Prime. But instead of aiming at the same target, he aimed at a different one, 2,400 meters distant and barely visible to the naked eye. The shot echoed across the training range, and the distant target disappeared in a cloud of debris. "Technology gives you advantages," Marcus explained to the stunned recruit, "but understanding gives you options. Your energy weapon is more advanced than my rifle, but my rifle can reach targets that your weapon cannot. The question isn't which tool is better. The question is which tool is appropriate for the mission." HFY's attitude changed completely after that demonstration. Like so many others before him, he discovered that effectiveness came in many forms, and that the most dangerous enemy was often the one you underestimated. As Marcus reviewed the day's training reports in his office that evening, he reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this point. From the object of ridicule to one of the most influential military instructors in the galaxy, he had helped prove that diversity of thought and approach was not just valuable, but essential for military success. The laughter had stopped long ago, replaced by something far more valuable: the recognition that every species brought unique strengths to the galactic community, and that those differences were not weaknesses to be overcome, but advantages to be leveraged. 2 years had passed since Marcus first stepped onto the recruitment station, and the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Human Tactical Integration Program had expanded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, with human advisors now serving in every major military command. What had begun as one man's struggle for respect had evolved into a revolution in galactic military doctrine. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Human Strategic Studies Institute, watching as transport ships arrived carrying students from the furthest reaches of known space. The institute had become the premier military academy in the galaxy, and the waiting list for admission stretched for years. "Hard to believe it all started with them laughing at your 2,000-meter effective range," observed Zephyr 9 Alpha, who had become both Marcus's closest friend and his deputy director of tactical studies. Marcus smiled, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. "Sometimes the best way to prove a point is to let your actions speak louder than words." Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see mixed species training groups conducting exercises that would have been impossible to imagine just 2 years earlier. Gorvac heavy infantry working in coordination with human precision fire teams. Thraxian rapid assault specialists learning patience and planning from human instructors. Vortani scouts teaching alien species the art of stealth, while learning human psychological warfare techniques in return. The transformation hadn't been limited to military applications. The success of human tactical thinking had led to broader integration programs in engineering, science, and exploration. The galaxy had discovered that the same innovative thinking that made humans effective warriors also made them excellent problem solvers in other fields. "Sir," called Lieutenant Torres, one of the new human instructors who had arrived from Earth. "We're receiving priority communications from Galactic Command. The Void Syndicate has launched a major offensive in the Outer Rim, and they're requesting immediate deployment of human-trained response teams." Marcus exchanged glances with Zephyr 9 Alpha. The Void Syndicate had adapted their tactics repeatedly over the past 2 years, but each adaptation had only led to new innovations in human-influenced warfare. It had become a deadly game of tactical evolution, with each side pushing the other to develop new approaches to combat. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked as they moved toward the command center. "They've seized control of the Nexar system," Torres reported, pulling up the tactical display. "Intelligence indicates they're using new tactics that seem specifically designed to counter human precision fire doctrine." The holographic display showed a sobering picture. The Void Syndicate had learned from their previous defeats and had developed countermeasures that neutralized many of the advantages that human-trained units had previously enjoyed. Automated defense systems that could detect and engage targets at extreme range, decoy installations that wasted precision ammunition on false targets, mobile command structures that moved constantly to avoid targeted elimination. "They're good students," Marcus admitted with grudging respect. "They've studied our methods and developed effective countermeasures." But as he examined the tactical data more closely, Marcus began to see opportunities that the enemy might not have considered. The same adaptability that had made the Void Syndicate dangerous also created new vulnerabilities that could be exploited. "Zephyr, call a general assembly. I want every instructor and senior student in the main auditorium in 30 minutes. The auditorium filled quickly with representatives from dozens of species, all eager to hear how the Human Strategic Studies Institute would respond to this new challenge. Marcus took the stage with the same quiet confidence that had characterized his very first mission on Nexus Prime. "The enemy has adapted," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the advanced acoustics system. "They've studied our methods and developed countermeasures. This is exactly what we should expect from intelligent opponents." He manipulated the display to show the enemy's new defensive arrangements. "They're using our own success against us. They expect precision fire, so they've hardened their positions against it. They expect psychological warfare, so they've trained their troops to resist demoralization. They expect innovative tactics, so they've prepared for unconventional approaches." A Thraxian officer raised one of her arms. "How do we counter their countermeasures, sir?" Marcus smiled. "We don't counter them. We make them irrelevant." What followed was a masterclass in human strategic thinking that would be studied for generations. Instead of meeting the enemy's expectations by trying to overcome their defenses, Marcus proposed embracing those expectations and using them as weapons. "They've prepared for everything we've done before," he explained. "So we do something we've never done before. We stop being predictable." The plan that emerged from the subsequent planning session was audacious even by human standards. Instead of deploying human-trained precision teams against hardened positions, they would use those teams as decoys while entirely different tactics achieved the real objectives. "The enemy expects us to target their command structures with sniper fire," Marcus outlined. "So we give them obvious sniper positions to defend against while our real forces approach from directions they haven't considered." The operation launched 3 days later with Marcus personally leading the deployment. But instead of taking his familiar role as a sniper, he commanded from a mobile command post, coordinating the actions of hundreds of mixed-species teams across multiple star systems. The initial phase proceeded exactly as the enemy expected. Human-trained sniper teams took positions at extreme range and began engaging targets with characteristic precision. The Void Syndicate responded with their prepared countermeasures, deploying automated defenses and hardening their installations. But while enemy attention focused on the obvious threat, the real assault was already underway. Vortani infiltration teams that had been inserted weeks earlier began sabotaging the automated defense systems from within. Thraxian rapid assault specialists struck at logistics centers that the enemy had left undefended because they seemed irrelevant to precision fire tactics. Most importantly, human psychological warfare specialists began broadcasting carefully crafted propaganda that exploited the enemy's overconfidence in their countermeasures. The message was simple but devastating. If the Void Syndicate needed such elaborate defenses against human tactics, what did that say about their own capabilities? The psychological impact was immediate and severe. Void Syndicate forces began to doubt their own defenses, becoming increasingly paranoid about threats that might not exist. Units began abandoning positions not because they were under attack, but because they feared attack was imminent. The campaign culminated in the liberation of the Nexar system without a single major battle. The enemy's elaborate defenses became prisons that trapped them in positions where they could be isolated and forced to surrender. Their countermeasures against human tactics became psychological weapons that convinced them they were already defeated. When the after-action reports were compiled, military historians across the galaxy struggled to classify what had occurred. It wasn't traditional warfare, psychological operations, or strategic deception. It was something entirely new, a form of combat that made the enemy's strengths into weaknesses and turned their own preparations against them. General Thexvar, now Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense Forces, participated in the victory celebration via holographic link. His ancient features displayed what Marcus had learned to recognize as profound admiration. Sergeant Instructor Chen, the general said, "You have once again revolutionized our understanding of warfare. But more than that, you have demonstrated that the greatest strength any military force can possess is the ability to constantly evolve and adapt." As the celebration continued around him, Marcus found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this point. He had begun as a single human with an obsolete rifle, mocked by aliens who saw him as primitive and ineffective. Now he commanded the respect of the entire galaxy and had fundamentally changed how civilized species approached conflict. But perhaps more importantly, he had proven that strength came not from superior technology or natural advantages, but from the willingness to think differently and adapt constantly. The laughter had stopped long ago, replaced by something far more valuable: the understanding that in a diverse galaxy, the greatest advantage was the ability to learn from everyone and everything around you. As Marcus looked out at the mixed species crowd celebrating their victory, he smiled. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would require new solutions and innovative thinking. Fortunately, it was also full of diverse minds capable of developing those solutions when they worked together. The human sniper had become something more than just a soldier. He had become a bridge between species, a teacher of adaptability, and a living example of what could be achieved when differences were embraced rather than feared. The Killshots had ended, but the lessons would continue forever.